pull together several of the different topics that were addressed within the body of the essay. All right, your next goal is to give the essay a sense of completeness. And this example comes from an essay of comparison that was written comparing domestic and international adoption. So her thesis statement was, domestic and international adoption have been popular for those who cannot have their own children, but many differences exist between the two, namely costs, length of waiting periods, the number of children available to be adopted, and the accessibility of records. And now, having gone through our discussion about a good thesis statement, you can see how this works on many levels. It establishes the context of the popularity of adoption. It lays out the categories. We have differences between these two, and our points of comparison would be cost, length of waiting period, number of children to be adopted, and the records. So in terms of a comparison thesis statement, that's quite strong. Now in her conclusion, part of what she had addressed was that after making the decision, parents have many factors to consider, and we wrapped it up very nicely with this final closing statement here. The many differences between domestic and international adoption may make the decision process difficult, but in the end, no process is too complex to achieve the perfect family. So you can see that she wasn't arguing for one or the other, but was really trying to present the reader with information to help them make a better decision if they were to, pursue adoption. So it gave us a sense of completeness. We know that the essay is at an end, even though she isn't necessarily making an argument and telling us which way we should think. Okay, so you should be able to do that with any kind of essay, not just a persuasive essay, which I feel some of these examples have been maybe more geared toward persuasive essays. All right, so as you think about leaving a final impression, one way to do that, as we mentioned earlier, might be to present a call to action. And in the discussion of introductions and thesis, we looked at an example of an organ donation. Actually, I think back in comparison essays, we looked at the organ donation. So this would be a closing sentence to an essay about increasing organ donation, and it's calling us to take an action. Alternatives to organ sale do exist. Presumed consent is one viable option that should be more thoroughly considered as a solution to the organ shortage, because a solution must be found. The lives of 19 people each day depend upon it. It's also very thought-provoking because it reminds you that 19 people die each day because they lack access to an organ that is needed for a transplant. Another way to leave a strong final impression would be to encourage them to reevaluate their opinion. This comes from an essay that was talking about prostitution and how it is handled in the United States. And the statement is, this is the closing statement, switching our nation's focus from how prostitution affects our image and social standing to how dangerous it is to those involved, especially women, is the first step in reaching a desired answer. So the essay has argued that we need to rethink the focus that we have when we come to this problem of prostitution. Finally, in applying this to real life situations, again, going back to the introduction and thesis statement presentation, we looked at the No Child Left Behind essay, and in her conclusion, she has shown directly how the argument about changing and improving No Child Left Behind applies to the lives of potential readers. The days of No Child Left Behind are numbered. Society is continuing to become more advanced and competitive, and America needs to prepare her students by providing the best public education possible. It's time to leave No Child Left Behind, and we look at combining charter schools and international baccalaureate programs to give American students a better chance at competing. So she's applying it to real life, and you can also see there's a little bit of a call to action in there as well. So accomplishing several things within that one conclusion. So here are a few tips for you. Remember that we're always trying to be aware of the context. Think back to the they say, I say conversation that we have. You want to show the reader the importance of your contribution to that ongoing discussion. You want to highlight any new insight that you've given the reader, looking back to your introduction and the background information. How can we reevaluate that information now based on what you have presented and shown us throughout the entire essay that you have written? Possibly look at creating new meaning, and by that I mean explain what your information has taught the reader. Make sure that they realize what the new approaches that they should be taking to this information based on how you have presented it and how you have interpreted it for them. Clarify any implications. Okay, what did all of this information lead to? And that connects back to the idea of, an implication might be a call to action or a need to reevaluate our belief. But make sure it's very clear to the reader what it is they need to be doing with the information that they now have based on what they've read in your essay. Okay, I do have a short list of don'ts. You don't want to just restate the thesis word for word, okay? And we saw a couple of examples of how you can effectively restate some of the ideas or the keywords from the thesis, but not the thesis itself directly. You do not want to just restate the ideas of your essay point by point. You can summarize some of the key information, but this isn't a pure summary in that you're not rehashing everything. That leads into the next one. Don't rely on the conclusion to summarize your whole essay. Within each body paragraph, you should be clarifying how things relate to each other. You don't want to save all of that to the end. You don't want to just repeat the introduction. You definitely can reference the introduction, bring back, again, maybe some key words or some key information, but you want to evaluate it in a new light because we now know more than we did when we read your introduction. You don't want to introduce new information or completely new and off-the-wall research or statistics. You do build new meaning by telling us how we're going to interpret what we have read so far, but don't introduce something radically unexpected in your conclusion. And I want to, because I do like the art essay so much from one of my previous students, I want to leave you with her introduction and her conclusion. I think you can see here how this clearly does many of the things that we've talked about, and yet it avoids some of these pitfalls. Okay, yes, it does start with the same word. We're hearkening back to, or the same phrase here, we're hearkening back to the introduction in our conclusion, but we're not repeating everything in its entirely, word for word. We are summing up some of the key ideas, and we are closing with a very thought-provoking call to think differently about art, and especially to think differently about that art that makes us uncomfortable or that we are maybe not immediately drawn to. And then finally, let me show you my references page. I'll make sure that that is covered. Okay, but then going back, I'm going to leave you with this idea, with these words from the former student. So if you take a little bit of time, if you are willing to really evaluate your goals in your conclusion, address those, make sure that you've met those goals, you should find that you leave your reader with a very positive impression of your paper, and you leave them thinking what you want them to think. And that's a very important goal for your entire essay.